IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
Hello and welcome to the Habit Coach podcast. I am Ashdin Doctor, your habit coach, and today with us we have a very special guest. And it's so interesting the way that this guest came into my life and this podcast, because I have been on a trip of understanding what is my relationship with alcohol. Especially since the last 2 years, I haven't had too much because we've been in lockdown. Before that, it used to be party time. But, over the last few months, I've realized that I've been drinking twice in a month. Why do I need it at all? And I was planning on going completely zero alcohol from my birthday, which is tomorrow as we record this podcast. And I was thinking of teetotaling, which is not having alcohol for the rest of my life. And I was curious to understand what that is going to be like. And while I was making this decision, I got an email from our guest. And she said that, this is what I do. Would you like to record a podcast together? And I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I've been looking for. So let us introduce Molly Watts on the Habit Coach podcast. Molly, welcome to the Habit Coach podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Ashdin, and happy early birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just so excited. This conversation is one that I really was looking for other people that are talking about habits, because the real deal with alcohol, in my opinion, is that many people turn to it and develop an alcohol habit that is really based in just trying to escape, right? And relieve anxiety and relieve stress. And then over time, that habit builds up until it actually has some pretty negative detriments to your own life. It's really interesting that you said that in the last 2 years, you've cut back on alcohol, because I think globally that isn't true at all. For a lot of people during lockdown, the stress and strain became so much that they turned to alcohol more often.
It's so interesting that I was stuck on my farm for the last 8 months, right? So we had no access to alcohol. We had very, very poor quality alcohol that was stuck in the farm. So I was like, should I start making my alcohol? I was like, how do we make sake? How do we make rice wine? So that was a fun trip that went on for like a couple of months till everything was a disaster. And then we gave up on that idea. But Molly, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself so we can add context and then we'll jump into it.
Yeah. So I am a podcaster as well. I'm also the author of a book called Breaking the Bottle Legacy, How to Change Your Drinking Habits and Create a Peaceful Relationship with Alcohol. I'm also just a diehard football fan over here in the U.S. I'm a mom and I have a job as well, and I help people change their drinking habits and create that peaceful relationship with alcohol.
Why and how did you get on to thinking about alcohol as something that you wanted to focus on?
Yeah. Well, for me, Ashdin, it was really a lifelong issue. My mother was an alcoholic, and she actually succumbed to the disease not until the age of 81, which is almost unheard of for an alcoholic to actually live that long. She was in rehab 4 different times in her life, including one stint that was a 9-month residential rehab center at the age of 77, which again is almost unheard of. I'm pretty sure I know she was the oldest at the time, and I would be guessing that she might still be their oldest ever resident. And she drank 3 weeks after she came out of that program. So to say that alcohol has kind of been an underscore in my life is an understatement. And from a very early age, I was researching alcohol, trying to understand it, trying to understand my mother's physical dependence, and then developed what I call my own ironic oxymoronic habit, right? So I have this substance that's caused a lot of pain in my life, a lot of suffering over the years, just based on the impact that it had on her and our relationship. And yet, from my own upbringing and from that unconscious stuff that I learned, I also then turned to it myself, all the while having this mounting anxiety that was I traveling down a path of addiction? Was I genetically predetermined to desire alcohol more? And worrying, am I going to become an alcoholic like her? Because I had a lot of negative associations with it, but yet I was still doing it. I always tried to separate my drinking behavior from hers. So I had rules in place. If I only drank beer and wine and never drank hard liquor because that's what she drank, then I would not become an alcoholic. If I didn't get too altered, if I didn't get inebriated, then I would, then I was still maintaining control, right? But I didn't want to acknowledge or realize or articulate how this anxiety was riding with me all the time, right? So basically that's that kind of the history of where it was. But ironically, and I think I shared this with you too, I had a previous podcast and it was all based on developing the habits of a happier, longer life. 5 science-based habits that are proven to extend longevity and increase happiness, all based on watching my father, who took a very different path than my mother towards aging. He's 93.9, still living independently, and has had, 2 heart attacks and 3 heart procedures. So lots of stuff that would normally, and other things that have happened to his health along the way, but he's always maintained some positive habits. And those positive habits are really science-based. Like I said, they probably explain why he's still here with me. It was during my coursework or doing the work on that I sort of realized I had this sinking kind of imposter syndrome, right? I can't talk about developing all these positive habits when I don't want to acknowledge this one negative habit that really is probably keeping me stuck.
That's so interesting because the way that we think about our habits is like that, right? They just sneak into our lives without us noticing, or we have to consciously make them. So the whole idea of the Habit Coach podcast is understanding what are the things that you can consciously create for yourself and understand. So I absolutely, I'm in line with what you're saying. Now, why should people think of, giving up alcohol or cutting back on alcohol or, understanding their relationship with alcohol? Like, why is alcohol so bad?
Well, I don't like to so for me, I think that we don't want to demonize alcohol, right? We don't want to make it first of all, I don't want to focus on the substance and give it that much power in my life. With any habit that we have, I look at it in 2 ways. Is it a habit that serves me or is it a habit that doesn't serve me? Ultimately, with alcohol, there are probably some scientific reasons to not depend on alcohol. And we know these, we inherently know some of this information, right? We know that if we drink more than we want to, we don't feel good, right? I mean, there's a reason for that. There's a scientific reason for that. Our bodies are letting us know this substance is not, our bodies are working to get rid of it, right? And all the processes that people feel when they are quote unquote hungover are basically your body's mechanisms trying to rid itself of what it sees as a toxin. So I mean, on a real base level, it's not hard to understand that alcohol really isn't good for us, right? In that sense. There are some scientific studies that show, limited therapeutic benefit of alcohol. I want to be really clear about that, though. All of the studies that are ever done on alcohol are associative, which means that there is no direct correlation that we can make from the outcome of those studies that proves that alcohol is the reason for any protective or positive benefit. It could be the other things that people are doing in their lives that actually get those positive benefits. And because of the way of what alcohol is, we can't isolate people and say, okay, you can't have any other food, you can't do anything, you can't do anything else, all you can do is drink alcohol, right? I mean, you can't do that. So we will never have a double-blind, placebo randomized study, which is the gold standard of scientific research, to say that whether or not alcohol does or does not cause anything that is associatively positive. What we do know, and there is more causal evidence for it, is that alcohol is a carcinogen. So we know that there are increased cancer risks for consuming alcohol. It's the amount that we're not clear on. There is no, there's no real clear evidence on what it is. So in that space, you have to say, well, the only obvious answer is that the safest amount for any physical health would be 0, right? That's what it has to be.
That's so interesting because when you were talking about the fact that, so basically a red wine drinker might actually have better habits that exist in that person's lifestyle as compared to a hard liquor drinker, which is why that you would see those studies that talk about, red wine's good for you. So many people talk about red wine is good for you. And I remember going to parties and a friend holding up a glass of red wine and saying, look, Ashdin, anti-aging. And I was like,
Yes.
yeah, that's not how it works. Because you know how much red wine you'd have to drink to get a little capsule of resveratrol out for you. So it's interesting to say that there are other habits that are linked to the kinds of alcohol that you might choose as well.
Yes. And the bottom line is that, as I said, none of them, whether it's one versus alcohol, what red wine versus spirits or anything else, none of that research shows a causal link. So it doesn't matter what we say about it. The bottom line is we cannot isolate the wine. Now, on the flip side of that, like I said, I don't want to, you've seen studies too that show that people that are abstinence-based or teetotalers, right, don't have as healthy outcomes as moderate drinkers, right? Have you seen those types of studies? Well, and so you say, well, the moderate drinkers are, they're drinking something and they're better off than the teetotalers. Well, again, this is all associative data. So it's nothing that we can say clearly is because of the alcohol either way. Now, I will say that I want to just be clear with everybody, and I say this in my book. I say I've developed a peaceful relationship with alcohol. I am not 100% alcohol free. Much like you, though, I don't include it on a daily basis. I'm very cognizant, and that's really my message to folks is if you're going to include alcohol in your life, then we want to be mindful of that. We want to be mindful of the amount of alcohol that we're including in our lives, and we want to understand why we're doing it in the first place. Right? So I don't want to ever turn and use alcohol, which is really what for me happened is it became my go-to for trying to change how I was feeling. So at the end of a busy day at work, I would turn to alcohol to relieve the stress. When I was feeling kind of down or blue or depressed in any way, I drank alcohol to kind of numb out, right? If I was angry or stressed out, I would drink alcohol to try to change that. And if I was bored, right? And I wanted to have fun, I'd drink because that's what I thought and so my message is that we want to understand and we want to be able to take control of changing how we feel. That's really what I talk about in my work is understanding the dynamic between our thoughts, how that creates our feelings, that drives the actions that we take, and that's what the results that we have in our life.
That's so interesting because the way that I would see it is, what is the role that alcohol is playing in your life right now, right? Mm-hmm. And Molly, there must be a spectrum, right? We have people at one end who are daily drinkers, who may be alcoholics, who may have identified themselves as alcoholics, right? What would the spectrum look like? Because it's important to at least understand that as a categorization. And then we can discuss on what we should be doing if we're on what part of the spectrum.
Yeah. So here in the United States, we don't actually use the terminology alcoholic anymore. We use alcohol use disorder, and it very much is a spectrum from mild alcohol use disorder to moderate alcohol use disorder to severe alcohol use disorder. Severe would be someone that is having symptoms of withdrawal when they stop drinking, physical symptoms, right? So if you are noticing yourself having tremors, if you are noticing the dehydration, feeling the need to drink first thing in the morning to take off those physical feelings, that's definitely towards the end of the spectrum where you would consider yourself having severe alcohol use disorder. But what's interesting is what a lot of people don't realize, at least over here, I can say that most people don't realize, is the delineations between what considered a low-risk drinker to a moderate drinker. For women, healthy women, anything more than one drink per day, so 7 standard drinks in a week, is considered, that's low risk limits. Anything past that, and you're considered heavy use. So no more than 7 standard drinks in a week and no more than 3 drinks in any one sitting. Also, something that's and then for men,
I was going to ask that because you can have 7 drinks in a day. No, that's not how it works. So
no, you cannot. Yeah. 7 drinks in a week and 3 in one day. That's for women, and for men, it's basically double that. It's 14, and it's in double that in a week. 14 standard drinks in a week and 4 standard drinks in any one day. Those are low risk limits, and anything over that puts you into the realm, and that would be moderate drinking. Anything over that puts you into the realm of heavy use. And it's also really important to understand what those standard drinks look like. It varies from country to country, so you would need to look that up. I don't know what the Indian equivalent is, but here in the United States, it's 5 ounces of alcohol, of wine. It varies, again, based on the alcohol by volume, which, again, gets back to the science and understanding how alcohol affects our bodies and affects our metabolic systems. And it's all based on that blood alcohol content.
Interesting. Before going ahead, we'll take a quick break.
Oh, I injured my arm. I was in the gym lifting weights, doing, my normal pull-ups and traps with about 400 pounds in each arm. And actually, I was doing the bench press. I can't lie. I was on my 8th lift. It was about 360 pounds without a spot. I don't like to go lower and, embarrass myself. And suddenly my daughter enters all excited. And she says, "Dad, have you heard?" And I said, "Heard what?" And she said, "Now you can get Kotak home loans at only 6.5% interest." I was so shocked, my hand slipped, the bench press bar fell on my other hand, and before I knew it, I'm on my way to hospital in a lot of pain. But before the hospital, driver, Kotak Mahindra Bank pe rokna. I need to do this now. I blame my daughter for this. ऐसी बातें बताने से पहले कृपया ध्यान रखे. I mean, come on, yaar. Terms and conditions apply. Interest rate starting at 6.5% per annum.
And we are back. Do you have a preference of, what's a good alcohol to have? What's a bad alcohol to have? What are the things that you should steer clear of? What are the things that you should probably do have if you're a light drinker? And it's not something that you want to give up, maybe. But what is a good alcohol to have overall?
Well, I don't know that there's, good versus bad, but so here's one of the things is the higher the alcohol by volume, right? And the faster you drink it, the more, the faster your blood alcohol content is going to raise. So I tell everybody that you're kind of like your own petri dish every single time you drink alcohol, because everything that is happening around you, what you've eaten, how tired you are, whether or not you've exercised, how old you are, whether you're male or female, all of these things come into play when we drink, each and every time we drink, how much we've drank in historically. All of these things come into play when we take a drink of alcohol. And so you might think, oh, I'm just going to have a glass of wine, and it's the same glass of wine that you had 2 days ago, but on this particular day, you haven't eaten, you've worked out, you didn't sleep well, and suddenly your blood alcohol content soars as opposed to the last time that you drank. So you have to really be cognizant. And if you decided in that same scenario, if you decided to drink, hard liquor, because that hard liquor's alcohol by volume is higher, you would feel the effects of the alcohol much quicker as well.
Interesting. So start using yourself as a benchmark. See what it felt like last time, see what it feels like now.
Yeah.
And then start making a correlation there. Okay.
And realize that what's going on tomorrow might be different too. So you have to be continually mindful, right? I always say though, I consider myself, I call myself an alcohol minimalist. There is no time in my life when, where I'm going to be drinking a lot of alcohol. You know what I mean? That's one thing to get clear on real quick, is it's not going to be like, oh, okay. So just kind of like you said, like, oh, I can save up, my drinks and have them all on Friday and Saturday night. That's not the way it works.
So how do you say no to people? One of the questions I keep getting asked is, how do you stop after the first drink? How do you stop after the second drink? Right?
Yeah.
And as you go on drinking, it becomes harder and harder to stop because your ability to say no decreases. What are some of the tips and techniques that you teach people about how to say no, how to draw your limits?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 different questions there. But first off, the whole idea of it becoming harder and harder after you keep drinking, well, yes, I think I sort of just answered that ahead of time. We're not going to ever be coming to a point where we know, we're drinking 5, 6, whatever drinks, right? I teach everybody, I preach all the time, I guess, is we're going to put a plan in place, right? So just like you would plan your food for the day, right? When people get into trouble, it's when they drink in the moment, they listen to that impulsive reward center area of their brain as opposed to their logical prefrontal cortex that is thinking ahead and is future focused and knows my long-term goals and what I want for myself, right? The adult brain versus the toddler brain, I call it. And so I make a plan ahead of time. I don't just leave it up to chance for what's going to happen so if you're going to a party, if you're going to a social engagement, know ahead of time, okay, I'm going to have 2 drinks. This is my plan. I know exactly ahead of time what that plan's going to look like. Now, does that mean that in the moment there is going to be an urge that happens because I've had 2 drinks and I really want a third, right? Just like any other habit that doesn't serve us, we have to sit with that urge for a moment, understand that what's happening is a very ingrained neural pathway that we have used over and over again. And in the past, when that primitive brain throws out, oh, but I just want another one, I have typically answered it, right? And so the same process is just noticing, sitting with it for a minute, realizing I like literally say, oh, there goes that primitive brain again of mine. I know now that what I really want is a long-term peaceful relationship with alcohol. I don't want this in the moment, and I stick to my plan. Now, as far as other people, right, and the social pressure of, first of all, for me, I really think you have to, again, change your inner voice and your thinking about alcohol, right? So if I continually tell myself, oh, alcohol makes everything more fun, alcohol makes a party more fun, oh, I'm going to be missing out if I don't drink with my friends, then those thoughts, right? It's not the people around me and what's happening outside, but it's all those internal thoughts that I'm having that are actually fueling the desire to drink. So when somebody else says, to me, when someone says, oh, do you want another drink or whatever, it's really easy because internally my voice is saying, it isn't alcohol that makes this party fun. What makes this party fun is the fact that I get to connect with a whole bunch of friends that I never get to see because we're busy. And, if I'm drinking, all it's going to do is take me out of this moment. I'm not going to enjoy this person. So I practice those kind of, that dialogue, and I've practiced it and I've written it down and I've retrained my brain to see it differently. So when someone asks me, I'll just say, no, thank you. It's not, you know what I mean? I don't make it mean anything. I don't make it mean that they're trying to undermine me. I don't let it mean that they're trying to cast what they're doing onto me. I just say, no, thank you, because it doesn't align with what my long-term goals are.
This is so important to have a script ready on how you're going to deal with a situation like this. Because, you have friends who will force you and say, oh, come on, nothing happens in one. Stop being a bore, stop being like this, stop being like that. How are you going to deal with it at that point of time? So many of us have issues with just saying no to people. Right?
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest issues that we have. And when I was going down this journey of thinking about whether I should be giving up alcohol, I actually sat down and wrote down what my answers are going to be for all these questions. Like, Ashdin, that's such a stupid thing. Why are you doing that? Why are you giving up alcohol? Aren't you going to miss it? Don't you like it? Those kinds of things are conversations that people have.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love having a script and the whole writing things down. I mean, as a habit coach, this just as well as I do, that this is, it's proven the more we write things down, the more ingrained they become in our brains. And again, it's really getting our own unconscious thinking about alcohol and what we are going to allow. And I also think it's really important to just be able to frame whatever anybody else is doing in my life, to frame that in a way that has empathy for them and, understands why they think that, right? But that doesn't mean that I have to think that.
It's so interesting because many people say no in a way that is almost insulting. Right? Oh my
Right.
God, I can't believe that you're having this. Why do you drink?
Right.
Don't you know what it does to your body? And those kinds of things. Like, if you practice the script, then you don't necessarily have to insult somebody else who probably is drinking, or etc. And then, you don't become that person who you don't get called to parties, because those are the kinds of worries that people have, right? When I stop drinking, people won't think I'm fun. People won't want to hang out with me. And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, they won't call me for wine tastings, but hopefully they'll call me for everything else, right? So
Yeah.
that's the way that I'm playing around with it. It is a scary decision that I'm taking, but
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. And I think too that, if we start to change the conversation so that, I is it is the tasting of the wine the reason that we're really all gathering, or is it because we want to be together, enjoy each other's company, feel that connection between ourselves, share stories? Is that what's important here? Or is the tasting of the wine what's important here? And so that's the ongoing, I think, important overarching conversation that people need to start having. It shouldn't matter. Again, I don't like to come down on the moral side of because there's issues too with being the on the holier than thou side, I'm not drinking, you are, right? Like that whole thing. You don't want that either. This isn't about that, for me at least. It's about being able to come to a peaceful relationship and really not see alcohol as good or bad, but really as neutral, and really is just not the focus of my life. And I don't think that it should be. We don't want to make it the focus of anyone's life, right? I mean, because that's just not. I want it to be a non-factor. I want it to be something that is just I don't care about whether or not, I mean, I always say, I would honestly, I could never eat asparagus again and it wouldn't be the end of my life, right? I mean, I just wouldn't care one way or the other. If you told me, Molly, you can't ever have asparagus again, I'd be like, oh, bummer, but I wouldn't care. And I want it to be the same kind of way with alcohol.
Yeah, we make it such a big thing, right?
Right.
Especially since, and I think it comes from this fact that when we were kids, it wasn't allowed. And then you had to wait till it became allowed. And then through college, different people had different experiences with alcohol. So I remember a client of mine, he used to be the fun one who used to bring all the alcohol to the party.
Yeah.
So now it's very difficult for him to change that perception. It's very difficult for him to not be the person who is bringing everyone and making everyone a drink and all of that. So understanding what was the role that alcohol played in your life back then is important, because it plays a role right now in your life as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree. There are what I think about that is that, and I for my own self, this definitely was a part of my journey, was understanding all those unconscious stories and unconscious limiting beliefs that I had about alcohol that really kept me stuck. I really believe that it is uncovering all that story and questioning those stories, right? Questioning those unconscious beliefs that we may have been hanging on to. Is this really true? And is it true, and does it serve me? If we have a thought that continually fuels us feeling, stress or anxious or worried, is that thought helping me take better action in my life? Or is there a different thought? Is there a different story? Is there something else there that's going to change the feeling of stress, anxiety, and worry to peace, motivation, calm, determination, that's going to help me take different actions and therefore get different results in my life?
Beautiful. Molly, thank you so much for coming on the Habit Coach podcast and having this discussion with us. How can people continue this conversation with you? How can people connect with you? Tell us a little bit about your podcast and your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at www.mollywatts.com. That's Molly with the Y, Watts with an S. And the links to my podcast are there. The book are there. I have a private Facebook group called Alcohol Minimalists, Change Your Drinking Habits. So come on over and find us there. And Ashdin, I just so appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. I love talking about habits, good, bad, or otherwise. And I really hope that this is helpful to somebody to give them hope and to realize that they can change their relationship with alcohol.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. All right, that was a very interesting conversation that we had with Molly. Understanding the role of alcohol and the way that you perceive it and you perceive the situation in which you're drinking. In our next episode, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to break it up into the various stages that you can think about your relationship with alcohol and what do we do if somebody else in our life has an alcohol problem.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, I am Ashdin Doc on Twitter and Instagram. You can find lots more information on my website, awesome180.com, or check out different content on my YouTube channel called AWESOME180. That's Awesome180.
Hey everybody, it's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On the Storytellers and Storysellers podcast, Vineet talks to the youngest gaming creator, Ujjwal Chaurasia. He shares his content strategy and how he went from his first 1,000 subscribers to 20 million on YouTube. On Simplify, Shriketh is back after 2 years in Kuala Lumpur. The gang ask him about the differences between the two countries, work-wise, culture-wise, and infrastructure-wise. On the Edges and Sledges Cricket podcast, Varun, DJ, and Ashwin discuss CSK winning its 4th IPL title, the beginning of the T20 World Cup, and India's squad. Monica Halan has a new book, Let's Talk Money. You've worked hard for it, now make it work for you. She joins Anupam on Pesa Vesa and they discuss the ins and outs of the book. And on All Things Policy, Aditya Parikh talks to Serbian journalist and geopolitical analyst Nikola Mikovic about the impending hostilities between Serbia and Kosovo. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Slay Coffee, Intel, Kotak Mahindra Bank, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
If you love cricket, listen up. The Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast is here for you. Hosted by DJ, Varun, and me, Ashwin, we bring a fun, fresh fan's point of view to talking all things cricket. Sometimes it's just the three of us, sometimes we have guests, including current and former international cricketers. For new episodes every week, check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast on the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.